If you learned anything, the government is keeping you sick.
Experts claim you are dangerous to the psychiatric profession.
But I am. These people should be afraid of me.
What are things that you think the public is not aware of that is damaging our brain?
You're not stuck with the brain you have. You can make it better.
Many of us feel like we're not able to get to the truth.
Just ask yourself this one question. It takes you 3 seconds.
Dr. Amen, it's so good to sit with you.
Well, thank you so much.
So I am so concerned. 25% of Americans are on psychiatric drugs. I know so many young people who are getting on lifelong meds. It seems like we are in an environment where life is somewhat easier in some ways and so convenient, but everybody is depressed and upset. And so I wanted to sit with somebody like you who can help me wrap my head around what is happening in our country right now. We need some sort of medical revolution. We need physicians to speak the truth to us. And many of us feel like we're not able to get to the truth for multiple reasons. And so really appreciate some of the work that you have been doing. And I'm just curious, you are somewhat a revolutionary. You talk about things somewhat differently from other doctors and psychiatrists. I know that it has caused you some trouble, but I've also learned a lot from you. And so let's sit down and learn from you on what is going right and what is going wrong when it comes to the treatment of America's mental health.
Well, thank you so much. So I've been a psychiatrist 45 years, and what is happening now is shameful. Making diagnoses based on symptom clusters with no biological data has caused this insanity in our society. Last year, there were 340 million prescriptions written for antidepressants. There are 191 million prescriptions for opiates. 27% of all doctor visits, someone is getting a benzodiazepine, which is addictive and increases your risk of dementia. Why? The pharmaceutical industry is winning. And we're in this insane, outdated model of symptoms equals diagnosis equals treatment. So if you go to your doctor and you say, I'm depressed, well, he'll give you a diagnosis, or she will give you a diagnosis with the same name and go, you're depressed, and then give you an antidepressant, typically an SSRI, which in large-scale studies work no better than placebo, except for the most severely depressed. And I think giving someone the diagnosis of depression is exactly like giving them the diagnosis of chest pain. And nobody gets a diagnosis of chest pain. Why? Because it doesn't tell you what's causing it, and it doesn't tell you what to do for it. Imagine giving everybody with chest pain nitroglycerin or the same treatment. That would be malpractice. But yet, because psychiatrists virtually never look at the brain, it's this one treatment fits everybody insanity. Now, here at Amen Clinics, we've been looking at the brain with a study called Brain SPECT Imaging for the last 33 years. And we've done 250,000 scans on people from 155 countries. And what the imaging has taught me is that most psychiatric illnesses are not mental health issues. They are brain health issues. And this one idea changes everything. Get your brain healthy and your mind will follow. And so if it's this symptom cluster, and people can fill in the blank, that leads to, you have this, let me give you that. And so we end up with tens of millions of children on stimulant medication and tens of million adults on benzos. It's insanity. When you think of it as brain health, well, then you need to exercise. Then you need to start eating better. Then you need to stop poisoning your brain, right? The society thinks alcohol is a health food. It's not. It's poison. Or marijuana is innocuous. It's a total lie. It's not. It disrupts myelinization of your brain. It disrupts how your brain develops and how it works. When you think of it as brain health, it changes the whole ball game. And ultimately, for people who want to take away from this episode, just ask yourself this one question. It takes you 3 seconds. Whatever I'm doing now, is this good for my brain or bad for it? And if you can answer that with information and love of yourself, love of your family, you just start making better decisions. It's brain health, it's not mental health.
I think most people associate going to a psychiatrist with a few things. One is some talking, hopefully some listening, and usually some sort of prescription, right? It's you have a problem, let me prescribe something to you, a pill so that you can fix it. You talk a lot about behavioral changes. I'm curious, what is the connection between the physical brain and the mental brain? So you take these scans and images of the brain, and based on that, you're able to figure out what's going wrong and what's going right?
So SPECT, single photon emission computed tomography, looks at blood flow and activity. It looks at how your brain works. So when people come to see us, we take really good histories, right? We have them fill out 25 pages of information. We talk to them for a couple of hours. We really want to know the story of their life. And then we image them. And SPECT basically tells us 3 things: good activity, too little, or too much. And then our job is to balance it. And so, I talked to Nora Bolkow once. She's the head of NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse. And she goes, oh, we don't need to scan the brain because the brain has language. It'll tell you what's wrong, which is completely insane, because the brain will not tell you it's been exposed to mold and that's why you're anxious. The brain will not tell you it's really the effect that your depression is the effect of the car accident you were in 4 years ago when you rolled the vehicle. And even though you didn't lose consciousness, you can totally see how it hurts your brain. The brain won't tell you that. The brain won't tell you you really have an obsessive frontal lobe or you have sleepy frontal lobes. You really need to look. And what other medical specialist can you think of that never looks at the organ they treat? And so many years ago, neurologists and psychiatrists, they really were the same profession, but they got divorced. And neurologists got the brain and psychiatrists got the mind. And psychiatrists got the raw end of the deal because your brain, the physical functioning of your brain, is the hardware to your soul. And if your brain's not right, guess what? Your mind's not right. And so, yes, you have to do both hardware, software, brain, mind, but the place always to start is get the hardware right. Because if the hardware is right, you can't program it. So you could come to therapy for years and years and years. Yeah. But if your brain's not right, you hate the therapist. And I like being effective, right? That's what gives me self-esteem. It's being helpful. And when I first started imaging, people got better faster. And I'm like, I love this. Everybody's going to be doing this. But I soon learned it disrupts the status quo. And that's a very hard thing to do, right? If 25% of the population is on psychiatric drugs based on this symptom cluster diagnostic process, to go, oh no, that's wrong, you're going to get a little pushback.
So how often do you cause this kind of trouble to, I guess, the pharmaceuticals, where you scan someone's brain and you get a sense of their lifestyle and you say to them, you know what, you don't really need drugs. You need to change your diet. You need to exercise. You need to do different things, and that it actually works. Does that happen frequently?
All the time. So I do a show on Instagram called Scan My Brain. And I just scanned, so it's public, Jonathan Cain, who's one of the lead people in the band Journey. And his brain was not healthy. And he was struggling emotionally. And he stopped drinking. And I put him in a hyperbaric chamber. And what he told me, he's the keyboard player and one of the guitarists. I mean, it'll blow your mind what this man can do at the age of 74. And he said his hands didn't hurt and he could play faster. His wife even said he was better. So that really goes to, can my brain be better even if I've been bad to it? And the answer is yes. And how exciting is that? That you're not stuck with the brain you have, that you can make it better. Now, some people need medication. Some people get traumatic benefit from medicine. But medicine-only treatment is bad treatment. You always want to put your brain in a healing environment. What a concept, right?
You mentioned that you scanned thousands of brains, and some of them are different groups, right? You have psychopaths that you've scanned and criminals that you've scanned and people who served our communities, like police officers. Can you just describe what those brains look like? What does the brain of a psychopath look like?
So they have low frontal lobe function. So the front part of your brain, the front third of your brain is called the prefrontal cortex. Largest in humans than any other animal by far. So it's 30% of the human brain, 11% of the chimpanzee brain. So our closest animal cousin, right? 7% of your dog's brain, unless your dog is a bulldog, and then it's probably only 6%. 3% of the cat's brain. I had a bulldog. That's why I'm picking on bulldogs. People who are psychopaths have 10% less volume in their prefrontal cortex. And so they're missing important functions like empathy, the ability to see things from another person's point of view, because a psychopath is all about me.
Can you rehabilitate that? Can you rehabilitate criminals by cleaning their brain or
I have the best story. This story actually is going to make me cry. I saw Dale. He was 16. He came from jail in an orange jumpsuit with shackles and handcuffs. And he had a bad traumatic brain injury 4 years earlier and had done bad things. And we scanned him. We saw the damage. We worked to rehabilitate him. And then 4 years later, he ends up in the military, went to Iraq, was a hero, and was killed. And I got the most beautiful letter from his mother that said, it's only because of your work that he was able to do what he loved, and he died a hero, but he died doing what he loved. You're not stuck with the brain you have. Now you have to cooperate, right? If you don't cooperate, it's not getting better.
Well, more than cooperate, discipline, right?
Well, is this good for my brain or bad for it? Which means you probably need to stop smoking pot. You probably need to stop eating toxic food, and you probably need to exercise. It's really, it comes down to loving and caring for your brain.
What about the scans of, let's say, police officers? I keep thinking about people who served us or people in the military who have gone through trauma, for example. Have you scanned them and learned something interesting in a way that we can serve them back and help them?
So I was an Army psychiatrist for 7 years. I spent 10 years, 3 as an infantry medic and 7 as Army psychiatrist. And high levels of damage because of the blast they've experienced, because of the emotional trauma that they've seen. If you don't look, you don't know. If you don't look, you end up with the VA system we have now, where you get paid to be sick. That's a bad thing. You get paid to be sick, and psychiatrists have become the prescribers, or what I call the candy man. And no one's teaching them brain healthy lifestyles. And so, but yes, it can be better. I've scanned hundreds of firefighters. They have toxic brains. Just think about it. What are they around? They're around toxic fumes, a lot. And they also have emotional trauma. You know, you only have to take one dead baby out of a car wreck to have that imprint for the rest of your life. And they have dozens of those kinds of traumatic experiences in their head. Firefighters and police officers have 4 times the level of suicide as the general population. But yeah, police departments and fire departments are not going, oh, we have a vulnerable profession. We need to teach you how to love and care for your brain. We actually have a program for first responders. And I did the big NFL study at a time when the NFL was sort of lying that it had a problem with traumatic brain injury in football. So this is back in 2008, 2009. And I've scanned 400 active and retired NFL players, high levels of damage. Stop lying about it. Own it. Now, I think they have. But if you're going to let your children play football, and I'm not a fan of that at all. Brain is soft, skull is hard, skull has sharp bony ridges. Why would you ever sign off on a brain damaging sport for developing brains? Not rational. But having said that, if you're going to play, know it's brain damaging and you should do everything else right. So Tom Brady, who actually wrote a book called TB12, he played a brain damaging sport at a very high level for a very long time because he did everything else right. He went to bed at 9 o'clock. He didn't drink alcohol. He ate good food. He really took care of his brain and his body. And I think we need that same mindset in the police department because they're under chronic stress. And one bad decision makes us all think police are bad, which obviously they're not, and we desperately need them. Being a firefighter, that's a brain-damaging profession. We need to protect them because they're our heroes. And I think if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't have started with NFL players. I'd have started with firefighters because NFL players aren't heroes. They're entertainers, right? Firefighters are heroes that we desperately need.
So many of them are suffering. Does music have an impact on our brain? Like, I'm just confident that heavy metal cannot possibly be good for you. I sometimes I'll hear it when people are driving by. I'm like, whoa, what is that? Versus,
so we
let's
actually
say,
did
classical
a study
music
of teenagers where we had them listen to classical music while they did a memory game, classical music, rock, country, heavy metal. And they performed the memory game best with classical music. The second one surprised us. It was country music that they did best.
Okay, good.
And then rock, and then heavy metal was disruptive. And, you know, whatever goes in becomes part of who you are. And if you're listening to a lot of anger, it's public knowledge. I've been Miley Cyrus's doctor for a long time, and I love her. And I'm so proud of her because the Grammy she got this year was for Flowers, which is a song about love. It's about self-love.
Yeah.
And yeah, the music you listen to matters.
What are things that you think the public is not aware of that is damaging our brain?
Toxins, especially the ones we put in our mouth and the ones we put on our body. So I have all of my patients download an app called Think Dirty. And it's not what you think it is. It allows you to scan your personal products, and it'll tell you on a scale of 1 to 10 how quickly they're killing you. So for example, for 50 years, I shaved with Barbasol. And on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 is live a long time, 10 is die early, it's a 9. And I'm like, no. Now I shave with something called Kiss My Face. That's a 2. Because I like myself, and it's not even more expensive because it lasts forever. You need to not put hormone disruptors on your body. So things that have fragrance in them, or phthalates, or parabens. You need to start reading the label, right?
Sunblock?
Sunblock, same thing. And most people know they need to read food labels, but they don't know they need to read makeup labels and product labels. And there are companies like Earth Friendly Products that I love. They make the Ecos brand in the store, or Cora, which is a cosmetic company that makes things that are organic, that doesn't have these toxins in it. Because whatever goes on your body goes in your body and affects and becomes your body. So, like I love certain body washes and they were terrible for me. They smelled great. And now, and I get no money from any of the people I mentioned, but there's a company called Lafia that makes really clean body wash. And it's just, when you love your brain, you realize you have to love every organ in your body, because the whole purpose of our bodies is to carry around our brains, right? You can transplant most anything except your brain, right? If you transplanted your brain, you would no longer be you. And so that means I have to take care of my heart. I have to take care of my skin. I have to take care of my kidneys, my liver, and then my brain will be happy. Or like you told me, you talked to someone on the microbiome. Completely connected to the brain. And if your microbiome's not right, your brain's not right, which means you have to eat right.
What about marijuana? So we released a video about marijuana. People got very upset. I'm actually curious how people are going to react to this question of mine, because people are very, very committed to popularizing marijuana. It's become just part of our culture. It's become part of, you talk about creams and fragrances and treatments that are, an entire industry has been built around cannabis. Have you scanned brains of people who frequently smoked or used cannabis? And has that had an impact on
For the last 33
people?
years, as soon as I started scanning people, marijuana was a big deal, right? Marijuana's always been a big deal for my adult life. And it makes your brain look older than you are. And so I have two big studies, one on 1,000 marijuana users. Every area of their brain compared to healthy is lower in activity and blood flow. And then I published the world's largest imaging study on 62,454 scans on how the brain ages. Little kids have really busy brains, and not so much when you get to be older. And then we looked at what accelerates aging. What makes your brain look older than you are? And having schizophrenia was the worst. It aged your brain by at least 10 years. The second worst surprised me, because I thought it was going to be alcohol. It was marijuana.
Marijuana is worse than alcohol for the brain.
Was worse than alcohol in our study, right? I don't think either of them are good for your brain. And probably when it comes to violence, alcohol creates more violence than marijuana. But let's not say it's good for you. Now, I'm sort of a fan of legalizing it. Please don't put people use marijuana in jail. Bad use of resources. But let's stop with, oh, it's good medicine and I need it. Now, for some people, my mother-in-law died earlier this year. She had lung cancer. And it's like, if it helps her eat, that's awesome, right? Because it's really not worse than the opiate she was on for the pain. But now what we have, and this goes into the psilocybin discussion too, what we have now, all young people think it's innocuous. And when they get anxious, they turn to that rather than diaphragmatic breathing or not believing every stupid thing you think, or simple supplements like GABA or theanine or ashwagandha. And so we have all of these children with developing brains getting high, and it damages their motivation, it damages their memory, and it arrests their development. And so what we found is if you start when you're 13 and you quit when you're 25, emotionally you're still sort of 13. And I'm not a fan. And then And I feel like I've seen the party before, like in the early 80s, benzos were mommy's little helper. They were really innocuous and helps decrease anxiety. And then 10 years later, they're addictive and they increase the risk of dementia. And then the early 90s, alcohol's a health food, right? All the studies,
wine.
heart health and all of that. And then 2 years ago, the American Cancer Society came out against any alcohol because any alcohol increases your risk of 7 different kinds of cancer. And then toward the late 90s, Purdue Pharmaceutical and opiates, pain is the 5th vital sign. Should get people out of pain. And now everybody knows the disaster we're in with the opiate epidemic. And then it's marijuana is innocuous and it should be legalized. In fact, during the presidential debate, not this time, but last cycle, Cory Booker shamed Joe Biden because Joe Biden said, I don't know if there's enough research for the federal government to legalize marijuana. And the senator from Pennsylvania said, man, are you high? He tried to shame Joe Biden in a national debate. And I'm like, the research on marijuana is not good, and we are going to be sorry for what's happening in the country now. And now we have psilocybin, where everybody's going, yes, let's do mushrooms. It's the most common question I get when I lecture.
What do you think about it?
It's the most common question I get from my patients. I'm like, not yet. I've seen this show before that, you're going to unleash. And now I have a 21-year-old daughter. She said kids aren't drinking so much alcohol. They're going to mushroom parties.
Right.
And I get to see the people who have bad trips, right? This is not innocuous. For some people, it can be really helpful short term. I've not seen it fix anybody.
So many psychiatrists are actually using psilocybin
They're
as
so excited about
micro dosing. It's the new thing. And so have you scanned people who've been on regular usage of psilocybin?
I have.
And
it makes their brain look older than they are. And people, they'll point to what they see. There's an area of the brain called the default mode network. So front, middle of your brain, middle, back, top part of your brain, posterior cingulate, anterior cingulate, calms it down. But if you do too much, it calms it down too much. And your brain then looks older than you are. And it does. It decreases the default mode network, sort of the noise in your head, the chatterbox in your head, and it can sort of turn that off for a while. But you know what also turns that off is meditation. And why not? So the thing it's like, why not do the least toxic, most effective things for your brain that give you skills rather than just relying on pills? But we're lazy, right? We want the quick fix rather than the work. And I'm like, the work can be quick.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, the lazy word, because I feel like, so I'm a very, very disciplined person. I was just born that way. I'm not sure that I deserve any credit for it. I'm just very disciplined. But I do recognize that there are some people around me who just don't have that same DNA of being so disciplined. It's not that easy for them to stay away from the cheesecake. It's not that easy for them to go to bed, on time or all of those things. And so, doctor, is it fair to expect everybody to be so disciplined?
It's one of the things imaging has taught me is that I have a test online called Brain Health Assessment. And it's like, which of the 5 main brain types are you? There's actually 16 types because you can have combined types. So the first one's balanced, and likely you have a balanced brain, which tends to be really healthy. And when you make a goal, you can just sort of power your way to get it. The second type is our spontaneous group. They have sleepy frontal lobes. So they're more impulsive, they're more distracted, they have a higher incidence of ADD or ADHD. Type 3 is our compulsive brains, or we call our persistent brains. They tend to be worried and rigid, and if things don't go their way, they get upset. It can be argumentative and oppositional, and as soon as you say, the sky is blue today, I'm like, no, not so blue, it's sort of gray. And then there's the sensitive group that really need relationships, but can get sad easily. And there's the cautious
group that tend to be anxious. And so it's good to know what your brain type is. And I have to tell you, the scans have given me great empathy. I was asked to see somebody recently who just, if the word asshole would totally be associated with this person publicly. I'm like, no, not because I have the no asshole rule in my life. I don't get to be one and I'm not hanging out with them. But anyways, his brain was so damaged. I had such great empathy for him. It's easy to call people bad. It's harder to go, why?
Right. Well, but then also, how do we show up for, let's say, our loved ones or our children who have those different brains and may not be able to have that discipline and this expectation where we say, well, you know, instead of being depressed, why don't you go on a 45-minute walk like you're in a rush, right? It's just, I just know this from living life that not everybody is equally disciplinable, right?
Not everybody has the same brain.
Yeah.
But if you have a loved one that's really struggling, rather than leave them, maybe somebody should look at their brain. And we spend a lot of time here with people who want to be better.
Right. They have to want that.
Well, you have to want it. Otherwise, you won't do the work. But I often say, you know, I'm not very interested in what your diagnosis is because I think most of my patients are awesome. And my job is to just help them be more awesome. My job is to help them get what they want out of life. But, you know, most people actually never define what they want out of life. It's one of the first things I do with my patients called exercise called the one-page miracle. So get your brain right, and then you got to program it. And the one-page miracle is, what do you want? Your relationships, work, money, physical, emotional, spiritual health. What do you want? And then every day you look at it and you go, does my behavior get me what I want? But there's nowhere in school, think of how silly this is, where they teach you to be goal-directed. The front part of your brain needs direction because your brain is lazy, right? Your brain is always trying to conserve energy. So basically your life is centered around the habits that you have created. And you've created disciplined habits because that makes you happier. Most people have never programmed their brain. And so now what we have is a very negative, toxic society programming your brain for depression. You know, when you watch the news, you are not their consumer because you're not paying the news companies money. Who is the news consumer? 70% of their revenue comes from the pharmaceutical industry. And if they can piss you off, they make more money. And so I'm like, turn off the news, right? Whatever political side you're on, if it bleeds, it leads.
Right. If they make you upset enough, you'll click and you'll watch and you'll share and you'll comment. And so that's what they try to do. I mean, you actually see this across both legacy media and new media, just trying to get people upset.
Social media.
Yeah.
And, you know, this nonstop comparison where the most common question I get or most common negative thought I get from some of the most successful people on the planet is, I'm not enough. I'm like,
yeah.
If you're not enough, who would be enough?
You mentioned kids, and I don't know if you know this about my background, but I taught K through 8th grade in California. And I think about social emotional learning when we talk about what we're talking about here. And I don't think SEL in schools has ever done any of these things. So when you're mentioning mental perseverance, physical strength, spiritual strength. Oh my God, if you talk about spirituality in a classroom, it's like, I mean, you'll be attacked by, I don't know what, by the government. How dare you even bring spirituality into the classroom? How important is spirituality in a child's life?
Well, I think it's critical. And I think the research points to if you have a spiritual belief, if you have a spiritual group, and it doesn't have to be one, you know, it doesn't have to be Jewish or Christian or Muslim. But if you have a group that has a moral code that you're attached to, if you get depressed, you get better faster.
Hmm.
And so, and, you know, a whole bunch of bad things have happened in the name of God. But at the same time, we are a relational species. And if you live with purpose, you're way happier than if you think all of this stuff had happened by random chance and your life has no meaning. Right. And I think that actually takes more faith to believe all of this happened from a big bang a long time ago and life has no meaning. I think our conversation, it has meaning and in some ways has been designed. And people go, oh my God, how could scientists believe that?
Yeah.
It's like, well, how can you not believe that?
Do you think the people who go to a church or synagogue, or have you scanned the brains or treated people on and studied whether people who go to church are generally happier or better equipped at bouncing back at life?
I haven't done the studies, but Harold Koenig from Duke has done the studies and found that is exactly what happened. And then I did this great program with Saddleback Church, one of the largest churches in the world, called the Daniel Plan. And I went to my church one Sunday, and I had just finished writing Change Your Brain, Change Your Body. It's my second book on the connection between physical health and mental health. And that Sunday morning, I was so happy until I got to church. And then I walked by hundreds of donuts for sale for charity. And I'm furious. Right around the corner was bacon and sausage cooking on the grill. And now I feel like I got slugged. And then right before I walked in the sanctuary, they were cooking hundreds of hot dogs for the people coming out of the service before. And I'm so mad. And as I sat down, the minister started talking about the ice cream festival they had the night before. And I'm so angry. I'm typing on my phone, and my wife, she dropped our daughter off at children's church. She gave me that look, like, because the phone's the other woman. It's like, why are you on that thing in church? Don't you know you're going to hell? Right? She's the only one in my life allowed to give me that look. And I showed her what I was writing. Go to church, get donuts, bacon, sausage, hot dogs, ice cream. They have no idea they are sending people to heaven early. Save them, then kill them. This is not the plan. And I prayed that Sunday, it was August 2010, that God would use me to change the culture of food at church. And during the prayer, I'm like, it's the dumbest prayer you've ever prayed. How is that ever going to happen? You're not connected to churches like that. Like, God, deal with it. It's my prayer. 2 weeks later, Rick Warren, the senior pastor at Saddleback Church, our generation's best-selling author of The Purpose-Driven Life, called me. I'd never met him before. He saw me on public television. He said, I'm fat. My church is fat. Will you help me? And we created the Daniel Plan, which is a program to get the world healthy through religious organizations, and thousands of churches around the world did our plan. And I'm so excited by that because, you know, you get sick in your group or you get well in your group. So what if we got groups healthy?
Well, not a surprise when the church can do something that the government cannot.
And the government's not interested. I mean, if you learned anything, the government is keeping you sick. If you think of their food pyramid, it's a
when
diabetic.
Lucky Charms are healthier than a fried egg. Did you see that? The tough study?
It's a diabetic pyramid. And given that 50% of people in the United States are diabetic or pre-diabetic, you need to get rid of the simple carbs. They did a study at the Mayo Clinic, and they looked at people at a fat-based diet. So fish, avocados, nuts and seeds, healthy oils. 42% less risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. Think about that. People had a protein-based diet. So if you think of the caveman diet, 21% less risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. But people who were on the standard American diet, bread, pasta, potatoes, rice, fruit juice, sugar, had a 400% increased risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. It's the food. And you want to eat. And I always say, love food that loves you back. I don't know if you've ever been in a bad relationship in the past. I have. I'm not doing it anymore, right? I have the no asshole rule in my life. I'm married to my best friend. No. And I'm not going to have a bad relationship with food, which is, I love Rocky Road ice cream. Yeah, but it beats you up. It makes you fat, depressed, and feeble-minded. So, no.
What about in moderation? They say everything in moderation except for moderation. So in moderation?
That's the gateway thought to hell.
No
Everything
moderation.
in moderation is the gate. Because as soon as you say that, you're going to cheat, right? It's like...
I know I will.
You're going to cheat. And I think we should be serious because it's serious. It's your brain. Brand new study out in Lancet just a couple of weeks ago that Alzheimer's disease is highly preventable. So when I first said that, I wrote a book in 2005 with my friend Rod Schenkel called Preventing Alzheimer's. Oh my God, the hysteria. Oh, you can't prevent it. It's genetic. I'm like, no, you can prevent it. You have to prevent all the risk factors. So I have a mnemonic I write about and like called Bright Minds. You want to keep your brain healthy or rescue it. You have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors that steal your mind. And Bright Minds, the D is diabesity. 74% of Americans are overweight. 43% are obese. As your weight goes up, the size and function of your brain goes down. And now I've been called a fat shamer. I'm not. I'm just know the truth. The truth will set you free. Being overweight or obese is bad for your brain. And it doesn't mean you should be skinny. That's not good for your brain. But I published a study on 33,000 scans, and there was a linear correlation. Your weight went up, size of your brain went down.
What about the type of food one eats? So carnivores versus vegans or vegetarians. Have you studied any of that?
I have. Vegetarians have a higher incidence of depression, but you can do either one in a healthy way or either one in an incredibly toxic way. So one of our doctors is vegetarian, but he was having pasta and potato chips as a staple in his diet. His cholesterol was terrible and his health was terrible. And he's like, oh, I'm still going to be a vegetarian, but I'm going to do it in a much healthier way.
So you have to supplement omega, et cetera, right? Because there are certain things you can't get.
With omega-3 fatty acids and B vitamins, which often you find in meat. But meat, if it's commercially raised, is not good for you because it's pro-inflammatory. It has a much higher level of omega-6 fatty acids than grass-fed meat. And people go, oh, but I can't afford that. It's like, well, at least on my program, you'll eat less. And so you'll be able to afford it. Plus, what does it cost to have a brain that doesn't work right? Like people go, oh, I could never get a scan. That's so expensive. Way less expensive than getting divorced. It's way less expensive than losing your job. It's way less expensive than being underemployed. And, obviously I want people to take this message, whether they ever come to one of my clinics or not, which is why I write. And I write exactly what I tell my patients to do. Get your brain healthy. Stop believing every stupid thing you think. We haven't talked about that, but I teach all my patients to kill the ants, the automatic negative thoughts that steal their happiness. Actually,
how do you do that?
So whenever you feel sad or mad or nervous or out of control, write down what you're thinking and just go, is it true? Like, I was 28 years old in my psychiatric residency when one of our professors said, you have to teach your patients not to believe every stupid thing they think. Like, but I believe everything I think.
Right.
It's just a cause of
How do you know it's
suffering.
stupid? If you believe in it, you might think it's not stupid at that point in time.
Right, but when you write it down, my wife never listens to me. I've had that thought. And you go, is that true? It's like, no, she's listened to me a lot. She's not listening to me today. And, could it be where she's at in her cycle? Could it be that she's overwhelmed with losing her mother early in the year? I mean, there's all sorts
Could
of
it be
reasons.
you're boring?
Could it be I'm boring and I need to work on that? Right. But that is such a toxic thought
Mm-hmm.
that if you don't challenge it, and I'm not a fan of positive thinking, I'm a fan of accurate thinking with a positive spin. In fact, I'm working on a new book called Change Your Brain, Change Your Pain, about the intersection between physical and emotional pain in the brain. And my nature is more like Pollyanna. It's actually one of my favorite movies. She teaches people in the movie to play the glad game, whatever situation you're in. What is there to be glad about in this situation? But as I'm working on my new book, I also realize repressed emotions is a very common cause of physical pain. So in the book, Pollyanna, there's a scene where Pollyanna meets the Hulk. And they have to become best friends. So you have to be able to express your rage, but not let it control you.
How does happiness is a moral obligation play into your philosophy? This is one of the things I think you borrowed from Dennis Prager.
I love that. Actually, give him credit. In my book, You Happier, I talk about that in the introduction. He has a short video called Why Be Happy that I've given virtually to all of my patients.
Yeah, it's a PragerU video. Yeah.
I grew up Roman Catholic, and I'm one of 7 children. My mother was very serious about the whole thing. And that idea was nowhere in my childhood. I thought if you wanted to be happy, that was selfish. But if you listen to Dennis, he talks about why is it a moral obligation? It's because of how you impact other people. And he said, I guarantee you, if you ask someone who was raised by an unhappy parent or married to an unhappy spouse or raising an unhappy child, whether or not happiness is an ethical issue, they'll all say yes. And in You Happier, I then dive into, so what are the habits of happiness? And the one nobody talks about is you got to get your brain healthy. And for the book, I actually did a study of 500 consecutive patients. I gave them the Oxford Happiness Questionnaire, and then we looked at their brain. And if you have low frontal lobes, you're less happy. Isn't that interesting? If your brain is not healthy, you're less happy. And so another technique from the book I just dearly love is look for the micro moments of happiness. Is start training yourself to look for what's the tiniest thing. Like looking at somebody's eyes, for example. And you're like, oh, I like that. Notice what you like way more than what you don't like. And later in the book, there's another habit of with other people. I collect penguins. If we're in my office, you'll see all these penguins. It's because how do you train animals to do really amazing things? It's by positive reinforcement. You notice what you like more than what you don't like. And every day you are training everybody in your world by what you notice. And are you noticing what you like or what you don't like?
It's one of those prescriptions that you have where at the end of the day, you ask yourself, what went well today?
Love that so much, right? Start the day with today is going to be a great day. At the end of the day, I put myself to bed every night, did it last night. I say a prayer, and then I go, what went well today? And then I start at the beginning of my day just looking for what I liked about the day. And that's how I put myself to sleep. Now, the bad stuff will show up.
Yeah.
Imagine a big broom, sweep it away, deal with you tomorrow. Tonight, I'm putting myself to sleep with what went well.
Are there benefits to having some hardship as a child? Are there benefits to risk taking and the ability to just cope with some hard things when you're a child so that later on you're more equipped?
Yes. And I'm going to say this, it's going to frustrate some people. If you do too much for your child, you're getting self-esteem by stealing theirs. parents often, child comes and says, I'm bored. And it's like, well, you could do this, or you could do that, or you could do this. No, 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 no. Or what would be more effective is to go, I wonder what you're going to do about it. And then shut up, so that you teach them to solve their problems rather than your Disneyland dad or, the helicopter parents. I think that's ruining so many of our kids. When I wrote Raising Mentally Strong Kids with Charles Fay, who's the president of the Love and Logic Institute. And I love parenting with love and logic. It's what helped my daughter survive and become just a great human being. Because, she and her mom were fussing a lot about homework in second grade. And I'm like, I'm also a child psychiatrist. I'm like, you've done second grade. Let her do this by herself. And she wasn't listening to me. So she got all the parenting with love and logic tapes. And then it clicked. One night at dinner, she goes, I've done second grade. I'm never going to ask you to do your homework again. If you don't do it, I'm also not going to protect you when the teacher keeps you in at recess, or teacher's upset with you, or you have to repeat second grade. And Chloe stormed off and came back 20 minutes later, and nobody ever asked her to do her homework again. She held the anxiety rather than her mother. And if Chloe forgot her homework at home, nobody brought it to her at school. If Chloe forgot her lunch, nobody brought it to school. If it was a cold day and she didn't bring a sweater because she'd fight with you in the morning, nobody brought it to school. Chloe learned, I am competent, that I can solve my own problems. And so you just completely get out of the fight.
Yeah, I love that example. It is actually eerie because it's what happened with my kids last year. I said to the teachers, Olivia was going through second grade. I said to the teachers, I just want to let you know, I will have no idea whether my daughter has done her homework or not. And should she fail the grade because she did not turn in her homework, that will be the point where I sit down with her and say, now what are we going to do about it? But I won't be sitting with her and helicoptering over her doing her homework, because these are the mistakes that are safe for them to make. These are the things that they need to learn in school. It's not necessarily all the, the algebra or all the little details. It's those life skills, that personal responsibility, and you just need to take it on. Do you?
And that's so rational, but parents are filled with
fear.
With ants, with automatic negative thoughts. If they don't do well now, they're not going to get into Harvard. And that is so damaging because, one, not that many people get into Harvard, and that may not be the best thing. I am not a fan of sending children away to school. Your brain is not finished developing until you're about 25. So why is it rational to take a whole bunch of underdeveloped brains, send them halfway around the country where alcohol, free sex is the norm? And I'm like, no.
Not to mention the number of Marxists and foreign monies coming in there and influencing them and having them riot and destroy everything in sight.
Right. So I'm like a huge fan. I'm actually in the Hall of Fame of Orange Coast College. It's a local community college where I went after my military service, before I went to college and then, or to university and then medical school. It's like, parents are trying to fill the holes in their self-esteem with their children, and they make mistakes of putting too much pressure on the kids. You want the kids to love learning, and you want them to find their own motivation rather than to live out your unfulfilled dreams.
So how do you balance that with the concept of keeping them busy? Because if you let the kids be in complete control over their time, they'll just be on screens and iPads or not.
Take them away,
which is a huge problem. 15. So do you sign them up for multiple sports and afternoon programs?
No, because it puts you under chronic stress. And women today, I mean, tell me if you think I'm wrong. I think we're now dealing with at least 3 generations of tired women, because women are still primary caretakers for children. They're still primary caretakers for the house. There's still California, 90% of moms are working outside the home, and they're tired.
Well, the feminist movement has ruined it for us. They've made us be both men and women at the same time. That's what, I think they meant
so
very well in the
is-
beginning, but it has gone so far where now we're expected to be everything,
to do all these
right?
things and then to run them around like crazy. I wasn't run around. I mean, yes, I played Little League, but mostly I played outside. And,
Yeah.
I was not filled with fear, but because the national media was not the same animal in the 1950s and the 1960s. And 1960s were a shit show. I mean, it was terrible, right? We had Vietnam, and we had the riots, we had the race riots, and we had the campus riots, and we had assassination after assassination after assassination. But we didn't have 24/7 news
Right.
that frightened us. And so now with 24/7 news, everybody thinks their kids are going to be kidnapped.
Mhm.
Everybody thinks there's going to be a school shooting. Everybody thinks bad things are going to happen all the time. And yeah, bad things happen, but we're actually safer now than we were then. But our anxiety's way up because we have immediate access to everything in the world that goes bad.
Mhm.
And we think it's common when it's still very uncommon.
Speaking of the news, one of the first things that I did when I saw you this morning was I collected a bunch of hit pieces on you, which is, I guess, something we have in common. I guess when you do good for the world, you're both loved and hated. Mostly loved, but hated by apparently the same people. And so you have the Daily Beast, who wrote a hit piece on you. The Observer wrote a hit piece on you. Of course, Salon, and you have Washington Post, and the usual suspects who basically say that researchers and experts claim that you are dangerous to the psychiatric profession because...
But I am. I'm absolutely dangerous to the psychiatric profession. I'm ashamed of my profession that still, 2024, makes diagnoses based on symptom clusters with no biological data, is in bed with the pharmaceutical industry, and 340 million prescriptions were written last year for antidepressants with no biological data. I'm ashamed of that. I'm a medical doctor. What medical doctor never looks at the organ they treat? These people should be afraid of me. Now, I've been at war with the American Psychiatric Association for 30 years, and Lord knows how this happened. It's a bit of a miracle. They called me up in February and they said, we're going to make you an APA thought leader. And I thought I was on candid camera. I'm like, no, you're not.
Maybe they wanted to control you.
No, you're not. And they made the most beautiful 7-minute video that they play on my work on, you don't know unless you look, imaging. And they played it at the American Psychiatric Association annual meeting over and over and over again. And some of my haters posted on X. It's, oh, I can't believe money talks. It's the only reason they're highlighting him. And I'm going to go to their booth and burn it down. So they actually posted this publicly, which I just thought was hysterical. And, but my favorite story is this one. 2005, 2020 came to my office just like this. And they said they wanted to talk to me about my work with childhood bipolar disorder. And I'm honored, I think, and love talking about my work. And the reporter sitting there just across from me like you are said, this is how he opens the interview. He said, there's a doctor from Columbia by the name of Brad Peterson who said you should be arrested for your work. How would you respond? So that's the opening question. And I was on the speech team in college. And I remember my speech coach came to me at that moment, when you don't know what to say, take a breath Smile. It'll come to you. And I took a breath. I smiled. I said, that's so interesting. Last week, someone told me I should win a Nobel Prize. This week, you're telling me I should be arrested. It sort of keeps me balanced. And at the end of the interview, he takes his microphone off, throws it on the floor, looks at the producer and goes, you lied to me. This guy's legit. And so I didn't know who Brad Peterson was from Adam, but I have a clinic in Manhattan. Manuel Trujillo, who helped me open it, was Brad Peterson's professor when he was a resident at NYU. And he got Dr. Peterson to meet me in New York. And Dr. Peterson realized I shouldn't be arrested. And just a couple of months ago, he and I published an article in Translational Psychiatry, which is a Lancet journal on depression and SPECT. And I love that.
Obviously, you have your books and you have your treatments, but I want to go through some of these things because people across America and the world are listening, and they don't even need to contact you or me to get a hold of some of these things, like saffron. You're a fan of saffron? What does saffron do for people?
25 randomized controlled trials showing that it's equally effective to antidepressants like Prozac and Paxil and Zoloft and Effexor. And most antidepressants decrease your libido and decrease sexual function. Saffron improves it. Saffron also has been shown to help with memory. So if I'm like memory, mood, sex, I like saffron.
Yeah, it seems pretty good. Pretty good. What about green tea?
So I like green tea. So I'm not a huge fan of caffeine because it can constrict blood flow to the brain. But green tea also has theanine in it, which helps calm things down, but also helps you focus.
What is ginkgo?
Ginkgo is an herb that comes from a tree that increases blood flow to the brain. So the prettiest brains I've ever seen take ginkgo.
Wow. Okay, these are 3 things I'm going to have to go and buy. You mention racket sports. Pickleball?
Pickleball, table tennis is my favorite. Tennis, badminton, squash.
Why?
Increase activity in a part of the brain called the cerebellum. Cerebellum's back bottom part of the brain. It's 10% of the brain's volume, but it has half the brain's neurons. And it's sort of the master checker, the master processor in the brain. And when it works right, people think better. They feel better. Negativity turns it off, and racket sports turn it on.
Wow. So amazing. And breath work?
So I'm a huge fan. I think second graders should learn diaphragmatic breathing, especially when you're feeling anxious.
Yeah.
4 seconds in, take a big breath, 8 seconds out. And if you just spend time doubling the exhale, it'll just have an immediate calming effect. It's like, I need my Xanax. It's like, let's try diaphragmatic breathing first.
Yeah, that's pretty good. How many hours do you think we should sleep?
7.5, I think, for most people. I don't like that President Trump only gets 4 hours of sleep a night. I think that's really bad for your brain. And a lot of world leaders actually brag that they only need 4 hours of sleep. But some of them later on, like Winston Churchill, end up with dementia.
What do you think Donald Trump's brain looks like?
It's a fascinating question because he has been brutalized. If you just, let's just think about it. Before it, he was wealthy and famous and had one of the best shows on television, one of the longest running shows on television, runs and wins. But from the moment he ran, it was about Russia, which turned out to be a hoax. And then he lost, and he doesn't have good control over what comes out of his mouth, which is a bad thing. So I'm concerned about his frontal lobes. But what all of the scandals would have taken almost everybody out, and he's still there.
Yeah.
And one the Republican nomination, not by a little bit, right? He beat everybody.
Well, and he seems to have incredible tenacity, just hours and hours.
Is amazing. Now, I'd rather he gave up the Diet Cokes and the
cheeseburgers.
Ice cream and the cheeseburgers and all of that. But I'm sort of a fan of Robert Kennedy Jr. because he's the only one talking about children's health and toxins and things that are like really important to me. And he exposed some of the craziness with COVID-19. I don't know. I got censored. I was furious because it's the first time in my life I felt like the government and people like Google and Facebook suppress free speech. Yeah. And that's not okay. That's like not the America I grew up in, that I fought for when I was in the military. I'm like, I should be able to tell you, like, I'm a double board certified psychiatrist, what I think.
Yeah.
And if I said what I thought, like, you should be careful with the vaccine. You should like give it time to see who it really benefits and who it doesn't. What Anthony Fauci said before it was developed, he's like, oh, I'd never give this to children. Now, all of a sudden, my niece, who I adopted, who goes to UCLA, she was forced to get the vaccine. Yeah. Like, COVID doesn't kill young people. It's like, why would you force young people to get a vaccine? Why would you force them to put something in their body that, oh, by the way, made her sick for almost a month?
It's part of this whole same issue, which I opened our conversation with, and that is that we are waking up. America is waking up. I know you feel like that moment during COVID woke you up to see this kind of censorship. It woke us up as well to see that we are being lied to and we are not hearing the entire truth. And there are these big organizations that are really controlling and puppeteering what you're allowed to say as a physician who is engaging with patients every single day, and what we're able to hear from people like you. There's been a wall between us. And I think what many of us are trying to do is to try to break that wall so we can go directly to doctors like you and hear from you what is working, what is not working, what does an expert like you have to say. And so I'm really grateful. We'll continue to follow you on Instagram and read your books, and you're on X. And so really appreciate this conversation and all the work you do.
Thank you for helping me share this message.